The white walls of the medical facility seemed to glow under the harsh lights. Commander Vextol sat in a chair that was too small for his large frame. His forearms rested on the metal table, while his compound eyes looked at the panel of beings sitting across from him. The scars on his chitinous shell told stories of many battles, but today he would tell a different kind of story with his words. Dr. Kelmeran, the chief psychologist, adjusted her recording device. Her blue skin showed the concern lines that marked her species when they were worried. Next to her sat General Vortek, his red uniform decorated with medals from dozens of campaigns. The third member of the panel was Historian Nexwin, whose pale gray features showed no emotion as always. Commander Vexthul, Dr. Kelmeran began, her voice soft and careful. We need you to tell us about the war with the humans. Your experiences during those 3 years. We know this is difficult, but the Coalition needs to understand what happened. Vexthul's mandibles clicked together, a sound his species made when they were thinking hard. His lower set of eyes focused on the table, while his upper eyes watched the panel. The memories were still fresh, even though the war had ended 2 cycles ago. You want to know about the humans, he said, his voice carrying the deep tones of his homeworld. You want to know why we failed, why the mighty Coalition could not defeat a species that had barely left their home system. General Vertek leaned forward. His red eyes showed impatience. We want facts, Commander, not philosophy. Tell us what you saw. Vexthul made a sound that might have been laughter in another species. Facts. Yes, I will give you facts. But you will not like them. He paused and looked at each panel member. When we first received reports about humans, we thought they were another weak species ready for conquest. They had simple ships, crude weapons, and they showed emotions during negotiations. We thought emotions made them weak. Dr. Kelmeran nodded and made notes on her device. What was your first impression of human military capability? Pathetic, Vexthul said without hesitation. Their ships used chemical propulsion and nuclear power. Our scouts reported that human weapons were kinetic projectiles and primitive explosives. They had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no quantum communication systems. By all measures, they were at least 500 cycles behind Coalition technology. The commander's upper eyes closed as he remembered. I commanded the heavy cruiser, Death's Wing, in the advance fleet. We had 7 Coalition species working together. The Zephyrians provided the energy weapons and shields. The Kreks gave us their warrior discipline and tactics. The Mentari used their mind powers for communication and enemy detection. We also had Veltar engineers, Quindo pilots, Hexon heavy weapon specialists, and Termog boarding troops. How? Many ships in the first engagement? Asked Historian Nexwin, speaking for the first time. 300 Coalition vessels against 97 human ships, Vexthul replied. We expected them to surrender when they saw our numbers. Every other species did that when faced with such odds. The smart ones would negotiate. The brave ones would fight briefly, then surrender when they realized defeat was certain. The foolish ones would run. General Vertek made an impatient gesture. But the humans did not follow this pattern. No, Vexthul said, and his voice became quieter. They did something we had never seen before. They fought as if surrender was not an option, as if defeat was not possible, as if death was preferable to submission. Dr. Kelmeran looked up from her notes. Explain what you mean. Vexthul stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the peaceful city of his homeworld stretched to the horizon. Flying vehicles moved in orderly patterns between the crystal towers. Everything was calm and organized, the way civilized species lived. We positioned our fleet near their Jupiter planet, he continued. Our plan was simple. Show overwhelming force, demand surrender, accept their submission, and integrate them into the Coalition. It had worked with 43 other species. He turned back to face the panel. The human fleet commander was Admiral Tony Richards. We sent in the standard surrender demand. Our translators made sure the message was clear. We offered generous terms. They could keep their government, their culture, their homeworld. They only needed to accept coalition authority and provide resources for the greater good. What was his response? Asked Dr. Kelmerin. He sent back a message with only 2 words. Vexthal said, "Go home." General Vertex snorted. Typical primitive. Arrogance. They did not understand their situation. No, Vexthal said firmly. They understood perfectly. That was the problem. He returned to his chair, his 4 arms moving to comfortable positions. We began the engagement at 0800 standard time. Our energy weapons should have disabled their ships within minutes. Our plasma cannons could cut through their metal hulls like they were paper. The commander paused, his compound eyes staring at something the others could not see. But humans are clever. They had studied our weapons from previous battles with other species. They knew our energy beams lost power over distance. So they did something insane. Which was? Prompted historian Nexwin. They charged straight at us. Instead of trying to maintain distance and use their limited range advantage, they flew directly into our formation. Our energy weapons were most effective at medium range. At close range, they lost focus and became less deadly. The humans sacrificed the advantage of their long-range kinetic weapons to negate the advantage of our energy weapons. Dr. Kelmerin looked confused, but that would put them at greater risk. Exactly, Vexthal said. Any sane species would have tried to fight from maximum range, inflict what damage they could, then surrender when the situation became hopeless. Humans chose maximum risk for maximum effect. He stood again and began pacing, a habit he had developed. Since the war, their kinetic weapons were crude but effective. Metal projectiles fired by chemical explosions. No energy requirements, no complex targeting systems, no power cores to overload. Simple, reliable, and devastating at close range. General Vertek leaned back in his chair. But surely their losses were enormous. They lost 31 ships in the first engagement, Vexthal confirmed. We lost 18? By any tactical measure, we won. But something was wrong. The humans who survived were not demoralized. They were angry. The room fell silent, except for the soft humming of the recording device. Dr. Kelmerin made more notes, while historian Nexwin simply watched the commander pace. I monitored their communications during the battle, Vexthal continued. Most species become quiet when facing death. They focus on individual survival, not humans. They talked constantly. They encouraged each other. They shared tactical information. They made jokes while their ships were being destroyed. Jokes? Dr. Kelmerin asked. Captain Jake Morrison of their destroyer Defiance was hit by 3 plasma bolts. His ship was losing power, and his crew was dying. His last transmission was heard by every human vessel. Vexthal stopped pacing and looked directly at the panel. He said, "Well, boys, looks like we're taking the express route to hell. Anyone want to come along for the ride?" "What did that mean?" asked General Vertek. He aimed his dying ship directly at our command vessel, Vexthal said. Full speed. No attempt to save his crew. No surrender demand. No negotiation. He simply decided that if he was going to die, he would take as many of us with him as possible. The silence stretched longer this time. Finally, Dr. Kelmerin spoke. Did he succeed? The Defiance struck our flagship amidships. The explosion destroyed both vessels and killed everyone aboard. 800 coalition personnel died in that collision. But that was not the worst part. Vexthal sat down heavily. The worst part was what happened next. Continue, urged Historian Nexwin. The other human ships saw what Morrison had done. Instead of being horrified by the waste of life, they were inspired. They began ramming attacks throughout the fleet. Not suicide missions born of desperation, but calculated tactical decisions. They turned their deaths into weapons. Vexthal's mandibles clicked rapidly, showing his agitation. We had to withdraw from the engagement, not because we were losing ships faster than them, but because our crews were terrified. In 3,000 cycles of coalition expansion, no species had ever used kamikaze tactics. Our warriors did not know how to fight an enemy that welcomed death. Dr. Kellneren set down her recording device. Commander, you seem disturbed by discussing this. Disturbed? Vexthal repeated. Doctor, that first battle changed everything. We realized we were not fighting a military force. We were fighting an entire species that had decided death was acceptable if it meant freedom. How do you defeat an enemy that refuses to be defeated? Dr. Kellneren adjusted her position in the uncomfortable chair. The recording session had been going for 2 hours, and Commander Vexthal showed no signs of wanting to stop. His forearms moved constantly as he spoke, and his compound eyes rarely focused on one spot for long. The memories seemed to pour out of him like water from a broken dam. Tell us about the Battle of Europa Station, General Vertex said. Our records show this was your second major engagement with human forces. Vexthal stopped his pacing and turned to face the panel. His mandibles clicked several times before he spoke. Europa Station. Yes, that was where we learned that the first battle was not unusual human behavior. That was where we discovered that every human was capable of the same madness. Historian Nexwin made a note on his tablet. The station was a mining facility, correct? Not a military target. It was. Both, Vexthal replied. Humans do not separate their military and civilian operations the way civilized species do. Europa Station mined ice and minerals, but it also served as a supply depot for their fleet. We thought capturing it would be simple. A few threats, a show of force, and the civilians would surrender to protect their families. Dr. Kellneren leaned forward. But that did not happen? No. The station commander was Captain Jake Morrison's brother, Colonel Ben Morrison. When we arrived with 15 ships and demanded surrender, he sent us a message. Vexthal paused and looked at the ceiling. He said, "My brother died fighting you bastards, and I plan to join him. Europa Station will not surrender. If you want it, come and take it." General Versick made an impatient sound. Emotional response, typical of primitives. Surely he could not fight a fleet with a mining station. Vexthal's upper eyes fixed on the general. That is what we thought. That is always what we thought about humans, until they proved us wrong. He began pacing again. Europa Station had a population of 12,000. Mining families, engineers, support staff. Most were not soldiers. But when we began our attack, something strange happened. Explain, said Dr. Kellneren. The station fought back. Not just the security forces, but everyone. Miners used their cutting tools as weapons. Engineers turned their equipment into bombs. Families worked together to build defenses. Children carried ammunition to fighting positions. Vexthal stopped and looked directly at the psychologist. Doctor, have you ever seen a species where the young volunteer to fight alongside the adults? Dr. Kellneren shook her head. In most species, adults protect the young by keeping them away from danger. It is basic survival instinct. Humans are different, Vexthal said quietly. Human young as old as 15 cycles were fighting next. To their parents, they were not forced to fight. They chose to fight. A girl named Amy Carter, barely 16 cycles old, led a group of teenagers in an attack on our boarding party. She killed 3 Krex warriors with improvised explosives before we could stop her. The room fell silent. On most coalition worlds, beings that young were still considered children, protected and sheltered by their families. The idea of them choosing combat was disturbing to species that valued the preservation of their offspring above all else. "How long did the siege last?" asked historian Nexwin. 18 days, Vexthel replied. "We could have destroyed the station from orbit in minutes, but coalition doctrine required us to capture facilities intact when possible. So we tried boarding actions, siege tactics, negotiation. Nothing worked." He resumed his pacing, his footsteps making soft clicking sounds on the floor. The humans turned every corridor into a battlefield. They used their knowledge of the station's layout against us. They set traps, created ambushes, and fought for every room. When we captured one section, they would counterattack to retake it. General Vertek shifted in his chair. "What about their casualties?" "Surely they were losing far more personnel than we were." "They were," Vexthel confirmed. By day 10, they had lost over 3,000 people, more than 25% of their population. Any sane species would have surrendered. Instead, the survivors fought harder. Dr. Kelmeren made another note. "How did this affect your forces?" Vexthel stopped pacing and sat down heavily. "Our troops were not prepared for this kind of warfare. Coalition military doctrine assumes that enemies will behave rationally. They will weigh costs and benefits. They will choose survival over destruction. Humans ignored all of these assumptions." He looked at his 4 hands, studying the scars that marked his shell. Lieutenant Amy Carter, the teenager I mentioned, was wounded in the attack on our boarding party. Plasma fire had burned most of her left side. She should have been unconscious from shock and pain. Instead, she continued fighting until blood loss finally stopped her. "That seems impossible," General Vertek said. "Plasma burns cause immediate shock in most species." "Not humans," Vexthel replied. "Their pain tolerance is beyond anything we had encountered." Sergeant Pete Johnson continued fighting for 6 hours after losing his right arm to an energy weapon. He used his remaining arm to operate a heavy weapon, covering the retreat of wounded civilians. When we finally captured his position, he was still conscious and still trying to shoot at us. Dr. Kelmeren looked up from her notes. "Were these soldiers exceptional, or was this typical human behavior?" "Typical," Vexthel said without hesitation. "Every human we encountered showed the same patterns. They would fight while wounded, protect others at cost to themselves, and refuse surrender even when facing certain death. It was not bravery in the way we understand it. It was something else." Historian Nex_Win made another entry on his tablet. "What do you think it was?" Vexthel was quiet for a long moment. His compound eyes focused on the window, where the peaceful city of his homeworld continued its orderly existence. "I think it was love," he said finally. The panel members exchanged glances. General Vertek looked skeptical. "Love? That makes no tactical sense." "No, it does not," Vexthel agreed. "But humans do not always make tactical decisions. They make emotional ones." Amy Carter was not fighting because she thought she could win. She was fighting because she loved her family and her home. Pete Johnson did not cover the civilian retreat because it was strategically important. He did it because he cared about those people more than he cared about his own life. Dr. Kelmeren set down her recording device. "How did this affect your understanding of human capabilities?" "It changed everything," Vexthel said. "We realized that humans do not fight for territory or resources or political advantage. They fight for each other. This makes them unpredictable and dangerous in ways our military planners never considered." He stood up and walked to the window again. On day 15 of the siege, we intercepted a message from Colonel Ben Morrison to his remaining personnel. The station's life support was failing, food was running low, and ammunition was almost gone. Any rational commander would have begun surrender negotiations. What did Morrison say? Asked General VO_Tech. He said, "People of Europa Station, we have fought well, and we have made the enemy pay for every meter of our home. Some of you want to surrender to save your families. I understand this. Some of you want to keep fighting until the end. I understand. This too. But remember that we are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for every human who will face these invaders after us. Make your choice, but make it with pride." The room was quiet, except for the soft humming of the air circulation system. Finally, Dr. Kelmaren spoke. What choice did they make? Less than 200 people chose to surrender, Vexthal said. The rest, almost 9,000 civilians and soldiers, chose to keep fighting. They fought until the station's power failed and life support stopped working. Even then, they used emergency suits and battery-powered weapons to continue resistance. General Vior_Tech leaned back in his chair. How did the battle end? We were forced to destroy the station, Vexthal admitted. Coalition doctrine failed completely. We could not capture the facility intact. We could not force surrender, and we could not accept the casualty rate from continued boarding actions. So we used orbital bombardment to reduce Europa Station to debris. All those people died, Dr. Kelmaren said quietly. Yes, Vexthal replied. But their deaths served a purpose we did not understand at the time. Word of Europa Station spread throughout human space. Instead of being seen as a defeat, it became inspiration for other human forces. They called the defenders heroes and martyrs. They named ships and bases after Amy Carter and Pete Johnson and Ben Morrison. He turned away from the window and faced the panel again. That was when we realized we were not fighting a military organization. We were fighting an entire species that had decided resistance was more important than survival. How do you defeat an enemy that turns every defeat into a rallying cry? General Vatek stood up and walked to the water dispenser in the corner of the room. The session had been going for 4 hours, and everyone needed a break. Commander Vexthal remained in his chair, staring at his hands while his mandibles clicked. Softly, Dr. Kelmaren reviewed her notes, occasionally shaking her head at what she had written. "Commander," she said when Vertek returned to his seat, "tell us about New Terra. Our intelligence reports say this was the largest human colony world, with over 2 million inhabitants." Vexthal looked up, his compound eyes focusing on the psychologist. New Terra was supposed to be our great victory. High Command decided that threatening a major population center would force human military leaders to negotiate. We had done this successfully with other species. Show them that their civilians are in danger, and they become reasonable. Historian Nexwin activated his recording tablet. How many ships did the Coalition assign to this operation? 47 vessels, Vexthal replied. Including my cruiser Death's Wing, we had 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts, 12 Krex battle cruisers, 15 destroyers of various classes, and support ships. It was the largest single-fleet action of the war to that point. Dr. Kelmaren made a note. What was the human defensive force? 12 ships, Bextel said, a mixture of destroyers and light cruisers. Nothing that could match our firepower. The planet also had orbital defense platforms and surface weapons, but these were old designs with limited range. He paused, and his upper eyes closed. We thought it would be over in a few days. General Vartek settled back into his chair. But the humans did not respond as expected. No, the planetary governor was a woman named Lisa Hayes. She had been a military officer before taking the civilian position. When we transmitted our surrender demand, she sent back a message that our translators had trouble understanding. What did she say? Asked Dr. Kelmeren. Vexthul's mandibles clicked several times. She said, New Terra has 2 million citizens who built this world with their own hands. We will not give it to aliens who want to take what we have earned. Come and try to take it, but know that every human here will fight you. The room was quiet for a moment. Historian Nexwin looked up from his tablet. She was threatening total resistance? She was promising it, Vexthul corrected, and she kept her promise. When we began orbital bombardment of military targets, the entire planet mobilized for war. Not just the military forces, but everyone. He stood up and began his familiar pacing pattern. We monitored their communications during the siege. Governor Hayes had declared martial law, but the humans were not being forced to fight. They were volunteering. Farmers abandoned their fields to build fortifications. Factory workers converted their facilities to produce weapons and ammunition. Teachers organized evacuation plans for children, while also learning to use military equipment. Dr. Kelmeren frowned. How can civilians be effective against trained military forces? That is what we thought, Vexthul replied. But humans have a concept called total war. Every person becomes part of the military effort. Old humans too weak to fight served as lookouts and messengers. Young humans carried supplies and ammunition. Adults worked in factories during the day and fought in defense positions at night. General Vertek leaned forward. Surely they could not maintain this level of mobilization for long. Civilian populations need food, medical care, normal life activities. They maintained it for 8 months, Vexthul said quietly. 8 months. Of every human on that planet working for one purpose. Defeating us. The commander stopped pacing and faced the panel. We tried everything. Blockade to starve them into surrender. Selective bombing to destroy their infrastructure. Landing forces to capture key positions. Nothing worked because the humans had prepared for total war from the beginning. Explain what you mean, said historian Nexwin. When Governor Hayes declared martial law, she divided the population into military units based on location and skills. Doctors and nurses formed medical battalions. Engineers and construction workers became fortification specialists. Even children had roles in the defense plan. Vexthul sat down heavily. They turned their entire society into a military organization. Dr. Kelmeren made several notes before speaking. What was your first ground assault like? A disaster, Vexthul admitted. We landed 3,000 troops in what we thought was a lightly defended agricultural area. We expected to encounter maybe 200 local militia with hunting weapons and improvised equipment. What did you actually encounter? Asked General Vertek. 1,500 humans with military weapons, prepared positions, and detailed knowledge. Of the local terrain, Vexthul replied. The farmers had received military training during the months before our arrival. They had built underground bunkers and hidden weapons caches. What we thought was farmland was actually a carefully prepared killing ground. The alien commander's voice became quieter. The human commander in that sector was Colonel Rob Taylor, a former military officer who had retired to farming. He had turned every barn, every house, every field into part of a defensive network. Our troops walked into ambushes that had been planned for months. How many casualties did you take? Asked historian Nexwin. We lost 800 soldiers in the first day, Vexthul said. The humans lost about 300. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what happened when Colonel Taylor was wounded. Dr. Kelmeren looked up from her notes. What happened? Plasma fire from one of our heavy weapons hit his command post. The explosion took off his left arm and caused severe burns across his body. By all logic, he should have been evacuated to a medical facility or at least removed from active command. Vexthal paused and looked at his own 4 arms. Instead, he continued directing the defense from his position. "For how long?" asked General Vertek. 18 hours, Vexthal replied. 18 hours of coordinating troop movements, calling in artillery strikes, and making tactical decisions while suffering from injuries that would have killed most coalition species from shock alone. His subordinates tried to convince him to seek medical treatment. He refused to leave his post. The room fell silent except for the soft sound of Dr. Kelmeren's stylus on her tablet. Finally, she spoke. "Did he survive?" "Yes, but that is not important," Vexthal said. "What is important is that every human in his unit saw their commander continue fighting despite his wounds. It inspired them to fight harder. When we finally captured his position the next day, we found that his troops had carried him to a new location where he could continue commanding the defense." General Vertek shook his head. "This is not rational military behavior." "No, it is not," Vexthal agreed, "but it was effective." News of Colonel Taylor's actions spread throughout the human defense network. Other units began showing the same level of determination. A corporal named Nina Brooks held a critical bridge for 18 hours against constant attack. She was the only survivor of her squad, but she refused to abandon her position. "How did she manage that alone?" asked Dr. Kelmeren. "She had help," Vexthal said. "Civilian volunteers kept bringing her ammunition and food. When her communications equipment was destroyed, a 12-year-old boy named Danny Chun ran messages between her position and the command center. When we finally overran the bridge, we found that she had killed over 60 coalition soldiers." Historian Nexwin made a long entry on his tablet. "What was the overall result of the ground campaign?" "We controlled the landing zones and some major roads," Vexthal replied. "But the humans controlled everything else. They had prepared for guerrilla warfare from the beginning. Every forest was full of hidden camps. Every mountain had weapon caches. Every city had underground networks that allowed defenders to move without being detected." The commander stood up and walked to the window again. The humans had learned from their history. They studied wars on their own world or smaller. Forces had defeated larger armies through persistence and local knowledge. They applied these lessons on a planetary scale. "Give us a specific example," said General Vertek. "Captain Mary Patterson commanded a unit defending the city of New Dallas. When we surrounded the city, she evacuated most civilians through underground tunnels that had been prepared months earlier. Then she and 500 volunteers turned the empty city into a fortress." Vexthal's reflection in the window showed his tired expression. "We spent 6 weeks fighting for that city, block by block, building by building. Every structure was trapped. Every street was covered by hidden weapons. Captain Patterson's forces would attack, then disappear into the tunnel system, then attack again from a different location." "How many casualties did this cost?" asked Dr. Kelmeren. "We lost 2,000 soldiers taking New Dallas," Vexthal said. "Captain Patterson lost most of her volunteers. But when we finally controlled the city, we discovered that the real purpose had been to delay us while other human forces prepared new defensive positions." He turned away from the window and faced the panel. "That was when we realized the truth about New Terra. The humans were not trying to win individual battles. They were trying to make the cost of conquest so high that we would choose to leave rather than continue fighting." "Did this strategy work?" asked historian Nexwin. The afternoon light streaming through the windows had grown dim during the long interrogation session. Dr. Kelmeren ordered food and drinks for everyone, but Commander Vexthal barely touched the nutrition paste designed for his species. His compound eyes remained fixed on the table, while his mandibles clicked in the slow rhythm that indicated deep thought. General Vartek finished his meal and leaned back in his chair. Commander, we need to understand something. You have described human tactics and their willingness to die for their beliefs. But what made them so different from other species we have encountered? What made them so difficult to predict? Vexthol looked up from the table. His forearms moved to different positions as he considered the question. General, have you ever studied a species that had no specialized roles? No clear hierarchy based on biology or natural abilities? What do you mean? Asked historian Nexwin. Every coalition species has developed according to logical patterns, Vexthol explained. The Zephyrians are natural technicians because of their precise vision and steady hands. The Kreks are warriors because of their physical strength and aggressive instincts. The Mentari are leaders because of their psychic abilities. Each species found their place in the galactic community based on what they do best. Dr. Kelmaran made a note on her tablet. And humans? Humans can do everything, Vexthol said simply. They are not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, but they can adapt to any role, any situation, any challenge. This makes them unpredictable in ways we never expected. The alien commander stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the orderly city continued its peaceful existence. Flying vehicles followed their assigned routes. Workers moved between buildings in organized groups, and everything proceeded according to established patterns. After the siege of New Terra, High Command ordered me to study captured human prisoners. Vexthol continued. They wanted to understand human psychology so we could develop better tactics against them. I spent months interviewing human soldiers and civilians. What did you learn? Asked General Vertek. I learned that humans do not think the way we think, Vexthol replied. We make decisions based on logic, survival instinct, and the good of our species. Humans make decisions based on emotions, personal relationships, and abstract concepts like honor and freedom. He turned away from the window and faced the panel. I interviewed a major named Sam Cooper, who had been captured during a raid on one of our supply depots. He had been wounded and could have escaped with his men, but he chose to stay behind and cover their retreat. When I asked him why, he said something I did not understand at first. Which was? Prompted Dr. Kelmaran. He sighed, those were my people. You do not abandon your people. Vexthol paused and looked at each panel member. I asked him to explain what he meant by his people. They were not his family. They were not from his hometown. Some were not even from his species' home planet. But he considered them his responsibility. Historian Nexwin made several entries on his tablet. How did you interpret this? At first, I thought it was poor military discipline, Vexthol admitted. In coalition forces, a commander's first. Duty is to preserve their own life so they can continue leading. Unnecessary sacrifice is considered wasteful and stupid. But Major Cooper saw it differently. The commander resumed his pacing, his footsteps making soft clicking sounds on the floor. I asked him if he regretted his decision to stay behind. He looked at me as if I had asked a foolish question. He said, "Regret saving my soldiers? That is like asking if I regret breathing." That makes no logical sense, General Vartek said. Exactly, Vexthol replied. But to Major Cooper, it made perfect sense. He had formed emotional bonds with his soldiers that were stronger than his survival instinct. This was not unusual behavior for humans. It was normal. Dr. Kelmaran looked up from her notes. Did you interview other prisoners? Many others, Vexthol confirmed. Lieutenant Kate Davis, a pilot who had crashed her fighter rather than let us capture it. Sergeant Bill Parker, who had held a defensive position for 3 days without food. Or water. Corporal Jane Foster, who had carried wounded civilians to safety through enemy fire. Every human had the same pattern. What pattern? Asked historian Nexwin. They put others before themselves, Vexthal said. Not sometimes, not when it was convenient, but always. Even when it meant certain death. Even when it served no tactical purpose. Even when logic demanded a different choice. The alien commander sat down heavily in his chair. I tried to understand this by studying human history. I learned about their wars, their heroes, their cultural values. What I found disturbed me more than anything I had seen in battle. Explain, said Dr. Kell_Marin. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years, Vexthal said. They have had wars that killed millions of their own species. They have developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. By all logic, they should have destroyed themselves long ago. General Vertek leaned forward. But they survived. How? Because they also developed something else, Vexthal replied. They developed the ability to care about strangers, to sacrifice for people they have never met, to fight for ideas that have no immediate benefit to them personally. He looked at his 4 hands again, studying the scars that marked his shell. I interviewed a civilian named Alex Stone, who had been captured while helping evacuate a hospital. He was not a soldier, not a government official, not even a young person who might be expected to take risks. He was a middle-aged engineer with a family. Why did he risk himself for strangers? Asked Dr. Kell-Marin. I asked him that question, Vexthal said. He thought about it for a long time before answering. Then he said, because someone has to. Because if we do not help each other, we are not human anymore. The room fell silent, except for the soft humming of the recording equipment. Finally, historian Nextwind spoke. Did this interview change your understanding of the war? It changed my understanding of everything, Vexthal replied. I realized that we were not fighting a military force or even a government. We were fighting an idea. The idea that some things are more important than survival. The idea that freedom is worth any sacrifice. The idea that love is stronger than fear. Dr. Kell-Marin set down her stylus. How do you fight an idea? You cannot. Vexthal said simply. You can kill the people who believe in it, but the idea survives. You can destroy their cities and ships and weapons, but the idea spreads to others. You can threaten everything they care about, but that only makes the idea stronger. General Vertek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. But surely human morale would break eventually. No species can maintain such intensity indefinitely. That is what we thought, Vexthal said. But human morale actually got stronger as the war continued. Every defeat became a lesson to learn from. Every casualty became a martyr to inspire others. Every victory, no matter how small, became proof that resistance was possible. The commander stood up and walked to the window again. The city lights were beginning to glow in the gathering darkness. I studied a battle where Commander Tony Richards led a small human fleet against overwhelming odds. His ships were outnumbered 5-1. His weapons were inferior. His chances of survival were almost zero. What happened? Asked historian Nextwind. He won, Vexthal said quietly. Not by superior firepower or better technology, but by doing something our tacticians had not predicted. He divided his fleet and attacked from 3 directions simultaneously. It was a desperate move that should have resulted in the destruction of all his ships. But it worked? Asked Dr. Kell-Marin. It worked because humans are willing to accept terrible risks if they believe the cause is right, Vexthal explained. Commander Richards knew that most of his ships would be destroyed. He knew that most of his crews would die. But he also knew that the attack might save thousands of civilians on a nearby planet. The alien commander turned away from the window and faced the panel. Each human ship captain understood the plan and accepted their role. They flew into battle, knowing they would probably die, but believing their sacrifice would help others. This is not military discipline. This is something else entirely. What would you call it? Asked General Vertek. Love, Vexthel said for the third time in the interrogation. Love for their species, their values, their future. Love strong enough to overcome the most basic biological drive for self-preservation. Dr. Kelmeran made several notes before speaking. Did studying human psychology change your own behavior during the war? Vexthel was quiet for a long moment. His compound eyes focused on something beyond the walls of the room. Yes, he said. Finally, I began to understand that we were not just fighting an enemy. We were fighting an entire way of thinking about life, duty, and sacrifice. How did this affect your tactical decisions? Asked historian Nexwin. I stopped trying to predict human behavior based on logic, Vexthel replied. Instead, I tried to predict it based on emotion. What would humans do if they loved their comrades? What would they do if they feared for their families? What would they do if they believed their cause was just? The commander sat down again, his movements showing the weariness of someone carrying heavy memories. The interrogation room had grown dark outside the windows. Small lights illuminated the recording equipment and cast long shadows across the walls. Commander Vexthel sat quietly in his chair, his forearms folded across his chest. The weight of his memories seemed to press down on him like a physical burden. Dr. Kelmeran activated a new recording crystal and adjusted her position. Commander, tell us about the final battle. Our records show that the Coalition assembled the largest fleet in galactic history for the assault on Earth. Vexthel's compound eyes focused on the psychologist. 3,000 ships, he said slowly. Every major vessel from 7 different species. The entire might of the Coalition focused on one small blue planet at the edge of known space. General Vortek leaned forward. Surely the humans could not resist such overwhelming force. That is what High Command believed, Vexthel replied. They thought that threatening Earth itself would finally break human resistance. Every other species had surrendered when their homeworld was in danger. Humans would have to do the same. Historian Nexwin made notes on his tablet. What was the human defensive force? 400 ships, Vexthel said. Everything they had. Left after 3 years of war. Old vessels, damaged cruisers, converted civilian craft, and a few new ships built in hidden shipyards. Admiral Tony Richards commanded the defense fleet from his flagship. The alien commander stood up and walked to the window. The city below was quiet now, with only a few lights moving between the buildings. We expected the battle to last a few hours. We had 8 ships for every human vessel. Our weapons were superior. Our shields were stronger. Victory seemed certain. But it was not? Asked Dr. Kelmeran. The battle lasted for 6 days, Vexthel said quietly. 6 days of the most intense fighting I have ever experienced. The humans had prepared Earth's defenses for over a year. Every approach to the planet was covered by hidden weapons. The orbital space was filled with mines and automated defense platforms. He turned away from the window and faced the panel. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that every human civilian had been trained for combat. Earth had become one giant fortress with over 8 billion defenders. General Vartek shifted uncomfortably. You are saying the entire population was militarized? Every person over the age of 12, Vexthel confirmed. They had turned their whole world into what they called a fortress world. Cities were connected by underground tunnels. Factories were buried deep beneath the surface. Food and water supplies were protected by multiple defensive layers. Dr. Kelmeran made several notes. How did the space battle proceed? Admiral Richards used tactics we had never seen before, Vexthel replied. He divided his fleet into small groups that attacked from every direction. When we moved to engage one group, another would strike our flanks. When we tried to maintain formation, They would concentrate fire on isolated vessels. The commander began his familiar pacing pattern. Human pilots flew missions that should have been impossible. Commander Ryan Foster led a squadron of fighters. In an attack on our command ship, they flew through our defensive fire without shields, using only speed and maneuverability to survive. Most of them died, but they damaged our primary communication array. What was their purpose? Asked historian Nexwin. To disrupt our coordination, Vexthal explained. Admiral Richards understood that our greatest advantage was organization. We had ships from 7 species working together, but this required constant communication and coordination. By attacking our command vessels and communication systems, the humans turned our diversity into a weakness. He stopped pacing and sat down heavily. Lieutenant Beth Morrison led another attack on our supply ships. She knew that destroying fuel and ammunition would force us to withdraw, even if we were winning the battle. Her squadron penetrated our defensive screen and destroyed 12 cargo vessels before being shot down. Was she related to the Morrison brothers from Europa Station? Asked Dr. Calmaran. Their cousin, Vexthal said. The humans had many family connections among their military leaders. This made them fight harder, but it also meant that losses affected morale throughout their forces. General Vatek looked puzzled. That should have been a disadvantage. It was, and it was not, Vexthal replied. When Beth Morrison died, other human pilots became more determined to avenge her. When supply shortages forced rationing, civilians worked longer hours to produce more materials. Every hardship made them more united, not less. The alien commander looked at his scarred hands. On the 4th day of battle, we achieved orbital superiority. Most of the human fleet had been destroyed or damaged. Admiral Richards was forced to withdraw his remaining ships to protect the planet's surface. High Command ordered us to begin bombardment of military targets. Did this force surrender? Asked historian Nexwin. No, the humans activated weapons we did not know existed. Railguns built into mountain ranges. Missile launchers hidden in artificial lakes. Energy weapons powered by the planet's core. They had spent a year turning their entire world into a weapon. Vexthal stood up again and walked to the recording equipment. He studied the blinking lights for a moment before continuing. Colonel Mary Patterson commanded the surface defenses. She coordinated attacks from a command center buried 3 kilometers underground. When we destroyed one weapons site, another would activate from a different location. How many casualties were the coalition forces taking? Asked Dr. Kelmaren. Too many, Vexthal said simply. We were losing ships faster than we could replace them. More importantly, we were losing experienced crews that could not be replaced at all. The cost of victory was becoming higher than the value of the prize. General Vertek leaned back in his chair. But surely the humans were suffering worse losses. They were, Vexthal admitted. By the 5th day, Earth had lost over 500 million people. Their orbital defenses were mostly destroyed. Their fleet was reduced to less than 50 operational ships. Any rational species would have negotiated surrender to save the survivors. But humans are not rational, said historian Nexwin. No, they are not, Vexthal agreed. Admiral Richards sent us a message on the 5th day. He said that Earth would never surrender, no matter the cost. He said that humanity would rather become extinct as a free species than survive as slaves. The room fell silent. Dr. Kelmaran set down her stylus and stared at the alien commander. Did you believe him? Yes, Vexthal said without hesitation. I had studied humans for 3 years. I knew they meant what they said. They would fight until every last person was dead rather than submit to coalition rule. He resumed his pacing, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. That night, I sent a message to High Command. I told them that we could win the battle, but it would require the complete destruction of Earth and everyone on it. I recommended immediate withdrawal. What was their response? Asked General Vertek. They ordered me to continue the attack. Vexthal replied. They said that making an example of Earth would prevent other species from rebelling against Coalition authority. They wanted me to proceed with total planetary bombardment. Dr. Kelmaren looked up from her notes. Did you follow those orders? Vexthal stopped pacing and faced the panel. His compound eyes reflected the room's lights as he considered his answer. No, I refused to commit genocide against a species that was only fighting for freedom. You disobeyed direct orders? Asked General Vertek, his voice showing surprise. I did more than that, Vexthal said quietly. I convinced the other fleet commanders to join me in withdrawing from Earth's system. We told High Command that continued assault would result in the complete destruction of both the human species and most of our fleet. Historian Nexwin made rapid notes on his tablet. How did High Command react? They were furious, Vexthal replied, but they could not ignore the tactical reality. We had lost over 400 ships in 6 days of fighting. The humans still had planetary defenses and enough weapons to destroy most of our remaining vessels. Pyrrhic victory was not victory. At all. The alien commander sat down again, his movements showing exhaustion. The war ended not because we defeated humanity, but because we realized that defeating them would destroy us both. High Command ordered a general withdrawal from human space. What were the terms of the peace agreement? Asked Dr. Kelmaren. There was no peace agreement, Vexthal said. We simply stopped fighting and left human territory. The Coalition officially classified the war as a strategic withdrawal to focus on other priorities. But everyone knew the truth. Which was? Prompted General Vertek. We had been defeated by an enemy that refused to accept defeat, Vexthal replied. We had learned that there are some species that cannot be conquered, some ideas that cannot be destroyed, and some principles that are worth any sacrifice to defend. The commander looked at each panel member in turn. The humans taught us something about the nature of freedom that we had never understood. They showed us that true strength comes not from superior weapons or larger armies, but from the willingness to die for what you believe in. Dr. Kelmaren made her final notes before speaking. How did the war change you personally, Commander? Vexthal was quiet for a long time. His mandibles clicked slowly as he searched for the right words.